9:40 p.m., February 15th, 1898. The USS Maine is anchored at the Havana harbor. Due to unknown causes, the battleship explodes, marking the beginning of the Spanish-American War. "Remember the Maine! To hell with Spain!" became the battle cry of the American people. After the attack, the USS Oregon was sent from its port in San Francisco to Cuba, through the rough seas of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The voyage to Cuba took 67 days, and arrived in Cuba 2 months after the war began. After this delay, the acting president, Theodore Roosevelt, realized that if the United States were to become a global power, and if the country were to be able to defend itself on both coasts, then an Isthmian Canal, a shortcut linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, would have to be built. The French began the construction of the Panama Canal in 1881 with an overconfident Ferdinand de Lesseps. The French ended up abandoning the Panama project in the year of 1889 due to overwhelming problems: disease, jungle, mudslides, and lack of money. The French left a trail of abandoned equipment and deserted villages that were eventually filled in with the jungle's luxurious growth. The Americans started a renewed construction of the canal 15 years later, in 1904. The Americans, through their grit, innovations, and determination, were going to succeed where the French had failed. This is not to say that the Americans had a walk in the park. They also had their share of problems, each which was solved with an innovation of some kind. From the beginning of Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, he had the idea to build an Isthmian Canal through Central America, mainly because the incident with the USS Maine was still fresh in his mind. John F. Stevens took over the job of chief engineer from John G. Walker, who was not suited for the job. When Stevens came to the country of Panama before the construction of the canal, Panama was essentially a jungle full of swamps that had defeated the French. No suitable place for a canal. In essence, the construction of the Panama Canal reclaimed the country of Panama from endless acres of jungle and swamp. Stevens' plan of action fell under 4 main categories: medical and sanitation, supplies and housing, transport of dirt and soil, and how to power the canal. One of his tasks was the reorganization of public health. Stevens gave all the money, supplies, men, and equipment to William Crawford Gorgas, the chief sanitation officer on the canal project. The best way to get rid of the mosquitoes that caused the French so many lives and so much trouble was to eliminate the swamps and moist areas where the yellow fever and malaria-delivering mosquitoes bred. And this was exactly what Stevens and his workforce did. Dr. Gorgas and his staff had 5 major goals: eliminating the mosquitoes as breeding grounds, destroying their larvae, killing full-grown mosquitoes, making sure all the workers' housing was screened in, and the immunization of the labor force and their families. One way of achieving these goals was to load excavated spoil from the digging area onto train cars and to deliver it to swampy areas. This, after a while, eliminated a large portion of the mosquitoes' breeding grounds. But how exactly did Stevens and Gorgas transport so much sanitation supplies to the canal zone? This was done thanks to Stevens' innovative idea to put to good use the Panama Railroad that happened to run right alongside the Panama Canal. The Panama Railroad was a major asset to the Americans that the French failed to put to good use, all thanks to Stevens. The moment he got there, Stevens saw potential in the railroad where no one else did. The railroad was old and had been built 15 years prior to deal with the gold rush passengers of the 1890s, and was not sturdy enough to carry the heavy load of the work from the canal. Stevens' innovation for the railroad was to make the entire length of the canal a double track, and to do this he had to rebuild bridges and culverts to the proper width. The rails of iron were replaced by rails of steel, and more than 100 miles of track was carefully graded and ballasted. New stations were installed and new and modern machine shops were constructed. The double tracking was the reason the building of the canal was a success, because it meant that trains could run non-stop in either direction. The Panama Railroad was used by the Americans to transport supplies, dirt and soil, men, food, equipment, and for a while, water to the canal zone. Stevens brought many great innovations to the Panama Canal, but perhaps the most important and most well-known of them all was his innovation to move already excavated dirt and soil out of the canal's path. This was no easy job, and was actually a job that the French had failed to find a solution. The railroad was used to move dirt and soil using train cars that were connected with panels and had only one side on them. This design was made so the machine could take the dirt and soil off the train cars in one swift motion. This machine was a Lidgerwood unloader and was shaped like a giant, one-sided snowplow. During the unloading process, a full train of dirt and soil would stop, and an unloader would start on one side of the train and would be pulled by a winch on the other side of the train. To put the massive amount of excavated dirt from the canal project into perspective, a trainload of dirt cars carrying the total excavation at Panama would circle the world 4 times at the equator. Housing was one of the innovations that contributed to the American success. Another goal that Stevens had was to ensure that the working force was adequately housed and fed. There were 42,000 workers from 97 countries, and according to Stevens, this was the largest number of men ever employed in modern times on a peaceful enterprise. Remember the dirt and soil that was dumped into swamps to eliminate mosquitoes as breeding grounds? Well, those dirt-hardened swamps just happened to form the foundation for the town of Balboa, the living quarters for the Panama Canal labor force and their families.
The housing was built on a scale of any small American city. They wanted to have everything in the Panama Canal Zone for the Zonians to be working just as if they were living in their hometown. And we're talking a post office, a library, schools, everything. Just a duplicate of what you see in the American towns here.
Yet another innovation on the canal project is how the canal and the city of Balboa were powered. At the time of the construction of the canal, electricity was just being introduced to large projects like the Panama Canal. There was a small and young startup company whose performance and efficiency earned them a large government contract to power the canal. This company might be familiar, General Electric, or GE. This was GE's first and largest government contract that earned them worldwide attention and fame. GE designed a control board that could run almost every operation in the passage of a ship going through the canal, with tremendous precision and fail-safe operations. Only through electricity could the operation of the locks work from a central point. Even after 50 years, the same control panels were still in use. When World War II broke out, it was a war that required fighting on 2 oceans, and suddenly a passageway connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific, the Panama Canal, became the most strategic place on the globe. How were the American military impacted by the Panama Canal?
Well, the biggest impact, I think, was that there was great fear when they bombed Hawaii that the next bombers would be coming over to the Panama Canal. And if that had happened, Ryan, the United States would not have been able to be as effective in the war because there was no way to get their troops from the Atlantic to the Pacific, which was needed for the war in Japan. And the Panama Canal was the lifesaver, I would say, of that country, of the country at that time.
How would Panama be different without the Panama Canal?
It'd be a totally different place. But economically, the Panama Canal is the #1 industry for Panama. Now, granted, Panama is a small place. It's only about the size of South Carolina. But as far as income and jobs, it is by far the biggest producer for Panamanians.
World commerce is benefiting from these significant changes to the Panama Canal. The changes in shipping routes brought many parts of the world closer to the United States. How about the cultural impacts on the Panama Canal, on the Panama area?
It still is today, and it has always been a place where cultures come together and mix. And the creation of the Panama Canal was kind of an extension of that, and kind of probably the largest expression of that mixture of cultures. And if you go to Panama today, it still is really unique in that way.
And to all the engineers whose innovations, such as the General Electric Control Center systems, Stevens wrote, "Your impact is still to come." The local Panamanian citizens and government experience the benefit of the cultural, financial, housing, and medical impacts. According to Theodore Roosevelt, if we are to hold our own in the struggle for naval and commercial supremacy, we must build up our power within our borders. We must build the Isthmian Canal, and we must grasp the points of vantage which will enable us to have our say in deciding the destiny of the oceans of the East and the West.